Welcome back, warriors. Tanse Sego Anibuju, Kwe Nindaluizi Pam Palmater, and I'm the host of this show, the Warrior Life Podcast. This podcast is a show about living the warrior life, a lifestyle that focuses on decolonizing our minds, bodies, and spirits, while at the same time revitalizing our cultures, traditions, laws, and governing practices. And it's also about asserting, living, and defending our sovereignty all over Turtle Island. And unfortunately, due to hundreds of years of violent colonization, oppression, and dispossession, we are also actively engaged in education, advocacy, and resistance against Canada's continued genocidal laws, policies, and practices that continue to present a significant danger to our peoples, our cultures, our lands, our waters, and the entire environment. And that's where we are today, fighting against the genocide that continues. Because genocide is not a thing of the past. It continues in full force. And June is upon us now, National Indigenous History Month. And so far, in the first few days of June, Indigenous peoples all over Turtle Island are dealing with the discovery of a mass grave of 215 children in Kamloops in Secwépemc territory at the former residential school site. Indigenous peoples are also dealing with the coroner's inquest into the death of Joyce Echaquan, a 37-year-old Atikamekw woman of 7 children who faced racism and misogyny by hospital staff before she passed away. Today, a Senate report about the ongoing forced and coerced sterilizations of Indigenous women that continue into the present. Canada is battling St. Anne's residential school survivors in court. Canada's refusing to abide by the tribunal order to compensate First Nations children in foster care for the racism that Canada engaged in. Canada's failing to expedite the registration of thousands of First Nations women and children after generations of sex discrimination and exclusion from their communities. And the National Action Plan and federal pathway that is a fragmented mess that doesn't propose a plan to end genocide or take concrete actions to protect Indigenous women and girls. And the list of grave human rights abuses could go on and on. Land dispossession and destruction, the criminalization of our hunting, fishing, and economic engagements. So in today's podcast, we're going to be talking about the National Action Plan and federal pathway documents that were just released yesterday. Numerous Indigenous women experts, advocates, leaders, grassroots groups, and organizations who work with Indigenous survivors, families, and communities spoke out yesterday with grave concerns about Canada's failure to come up with a national coordinated plan. But before we jump into it, it's important to acknowledge the countless Indigenous women, communities, families, survivors, experts, and allies who have worked for decades, even generations, to shine a light on this crisis and demand accountability for the murders and disappearances of Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit peoples by governments and their institutions. There would never have even been a national inquiry were it not for their determined advocacy and Canada's subsequent failure to create a proper plan to end genocide does not fall at the feet of those groups who provided input into that plan. So today, I'm honored to be joined by, once again, 2 Indigenous women warriors that I admire for their tireless work for our peoples on the ground, both of whom have been on the Warrior Life podcast before. Kukpi7 Chief Judy Wilson is the chief of the Neskonlith Indian Band in BC and also serves as the Secretary-Treasurer of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. Welcome to the show, Chief Judy.
Quite request Kukpi Skachin Te Secwépemc Ulu. I just said hi everyone. I'm Chief Judy Wilson from the Neskonlith Indian Band, and we're part of the Secwépemc Nation, and there's about 32 communities originally, and after the 2 epidemics, there's 17 remaining today. And I'm also a member of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. We serve about 110 First Nations outside of the treaty process in British Columbia, the modern treaty process. And I'm here today to talk about, several issues. Like you mentioned that, we started off in May was quite difficult, and then June, toward that last week, just hit us left, right, and center in regards to, it was Truth and Reconciliation's at 6th anniversary on June 2nd. I'm not sure if there was any statements that went out, but that's 6 years that we've been struggling with Truth and Reconciliation for those 94 calls, and then national inquiry on the missing murdered Indigenous women and girls, the 2nd anniversary, and they announced they would launch, I guess, their action plan, national action plan, and we did a podcast on it, or a media press release on it, and we found, like what I said right at the opening, I kind of opened up with a kind of a quiet comment on it, and I guess some of the media picked up, but then it really resonated because it was justice delayed is still justice denied. And I really feel that wholeheartedly, because those survivors, those women, they've been waiting for a long time to to tell their story. So they told their story, and it went through ceremony, and the federal government, Trudeau, accepted that sacred bundle. And I'm not sure if he understands what that really means, because he hasn't really fully, Canada hasn't acknowledged its own role in the genocide that they've perpetrated, not just to the missing murdered Indigenous women and girls, but also the residential school. So all of the genocide acts you're talking about, are happened to our people. And with the National Action Plan, it's like a action plan for an action plan and a plan for the implementation plan. So it's very confusing. And a lot of the groups like the National Women's Association, they're developing their own action plan. And I heard in BC, I can't confirm it, but I heard we were supposed to be developing our own action plan. Like, it's so fragmented across Canada. That's not the cohesiveness or the inclusiveness or the transparency we were looking for in regarding a national action plan. And now the provinces are mirroring what the federal action plan looks like, and we haven't even been part of anything. I'm part of the UniBC Indian Chiefs. We're part of a coalition group in Vancouver. It's about 30 organizations and survivors and families. We come together, and we've been having to do this work. We're not funded, resourced in any shape or form for it. We just come together, and we submitted, originally to the National Inquiry, and we've been having, it's like pushing rocks uphill for all the work we do. Some of our members, they advocate and volunteer to help women through the when they're going to courts about their loved ones who are murdered or missing, and the ones that are being searched for. So we volunteer, and we sit with the families, and we help them. There's like a lot of work that if you do ground searches, organizing and mobilizing, that's not including all the mental health supports and everything. And then if they get to a court stage, then there's a lot of support that's needed. And what the criminal justice system's like, it's like they're re-traumatized and re-victimized going through that entire process. And that's what we do, because there is no resources, there is no one doing this work. It's horrendous. Just when you think you heard the worst story that you could in your life, then you hear something that's even worse.
Even worse.
It's just our women, are the violence they face, and the types of how they're murdered, and some are just completely vanished on the face of this earth. They can't even find anything, and there are people that know what happened, and it's that's where they get those cold cases, and then they get tips and stuff. Because I've known some cases, one family in the north here, the sister keeps me updated, but they get a tip, and we support her in getting some of the searches done, and that's 30 years for an entire family that went missing. Yeah, and like, this is the reality we face. This is what we go through, and they have a national action plan, not transparent, not inclusive, not structured in a way it could be, because they say, oh, we got survivors, and I'm respecting the ones that are in the circle, but I know they could have did a better job where our survivors could have been more included in this entire process. And our organization, is quite a large organization in BC. We weren't included. We told directly the ADM Gina Wilson about the issues and concerns, and she just sat there and nodded her head. And we followed up with a letter, and nothing. Then all of a sudden, another lady came and met with us and didn't know anything. And Minister Bennett knew all of this. We sent all of these letters. It's not like the government didn't know. So we felt very dismissed in this whole process. We don't feel inclusive. They went around and selectively selected people who are like, we haven't heard any reports from anybody. So who are they reporting to? I'm not putting down the people that were selected. I'm squarely putting the accountability on the government for structuring it the way they structured it, because it's not meaningful, it's not substantive, and we're going to have problems. Like 3 years to wait for some of these programs and these actual things to hit the ground is too delayed.
It's too long. It's too long. Well, let's bring into this conversation one of my other dear friends, Ellen Gabriel. She is well known. She's a former spokesperson chosen by the people of the Longhouse and her community of Kanehsatà during the siege of Kanehsatà, otherwise known as the Oka crisis. She's also been the past president of Quebec Native Women's Association, and she's been an Indigenous human rights and environmental activist for decades, done a significant amount of international work, and she's also been on this podcast and really is strongly connected to her culture, the traditional governance of her nation, and the grassroots people who are often left out of these discussions. So welcome to the podcast, Ellen.
Kanehsatà Pam, nyawatitas kong garawi. Wagenyahtu tanu Kanehsatà agenagere. Ditinowarado nenesungoya ditsu tanu gatsitansras oyera. Ditinowarado ni teknistan huza. What Kanehsatà agwego de dawanere. So I just said thank you, Pam, for inviting me and to greet all of creation and Mother Earth. I'm Turtle Clan from the community of Kanehsatà.
Well, maybe I could start off with you, Ellen, and just say, by now you've probably had a chance to at least review some of the National Action Plan and the federal pathways. What was your overall impression? Does this look like a pathway to end genocide?
No, actually. And again, I'm going to echo what Chief Judy was saying. It's not a reflection on the efforts of the family who started this strong movement. That, in the beginning, there was like a community feeling that we were all together working on this together. But it relinquishes any kind of responsibility by the government. The first Stolen Sisters report that came out in 2004 by Amnesty International and the Native Women's Association of Canada had talked about that the root causes are in colonization. So we look at the Indian Act and it's a devaluing of women, Indigenous women. And so when we examine this, what is purported to be a national plan of action, I agree with Judy. It's like, so where is the plan? How much longer do we have to wait? And I remember the words of Carolyn Bennett. She said, we're not going to wait for this national plan of action to implement something. So why are they waiting for so long? You can't blame the pandemic because this has been going on for quite a long time. And the root causes, some of it, there's not enough accountability and responsibility for the police to take action. I mean, part of the problem was that the police were not responding properly to the violence perpetrated against Indigenous women. And so there's nothing in there really other than funding different government entities to take cultural sensitivity classes that have been talked about and have been done for decades. There's nothing new that really is there to really help prevent the living Indigenous women from exposure and experiencing the rates of violence that is in these reports. From the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, which also talked about violence against Indigenous women, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women Inquiry. And these are just, they're powerful reports that are sitting on shelves. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to give more money to the colonial entity that's creating the genocide that we are experiencing, the grief that we're feeling, not just for the children who have been stolen, but the women that the grandmothers, the aunties, the sisters, the friends that have gone, like Helen Betty Osborne. The trust, they don't talk about that this is a broken relationship. There is no trust. There is no faith in the policing authorities to take this seriously. In 2006, an annual General Assembly, the Chief of Police's created a resolution that they would deal with murdered and missing Indigenous women. They would have a protocol. It's 2021 and they still haven't come up with this protocol. So there's so many things that the report has a lot of potential to it. We have to start looking at trying to pull out what is good, because it's founded on the work that has been done before, but it doesn't hold the government's feet to the fire. It doesn't bring about the kind of change that I think that the families and the people who are still here and have been working on this issue, it doesn't provide the solutions. It's just another form, I think, in my humble opinion, for government to drag its feet and to not really address the issue of genocide and to decolonize the relationship that we have. If you're going to change the mentality of the people who are the perpetrators and who are probably still walking around free, having killed Indigenous women, we're not dealing with the attitude of society. We're not educating in the schools that violence is not part of our way. We're talking about murdered and missing Indigenous women. They're putting incarceration involved into it. They're putting all kinds of other issues into it. We're talking about the dignity, the safety, the elimination of violence. And these are all under international human rights covenants, not just declarations, but treaties that the government of Canada has signed on to. And there is nothing in there that talks about their international human rights obligations other than a bare mention of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
This is one of my concerns that I've been expressing in the media for the last few days too, what you were saying, Ellen, about that this isn't a plan where you see the government of Canada and the provinces have stood up and said, we are guilty of genocide. Here's all the ways in which our laws, policies, and practices contribute to murdered and missing, exploited, disappeared women and girls. And here's the immediate urgent steps we're going to take and treat this as a national crisis, like we would a pandemic or any other national crisis. That just seems to be missing. And one of the points I wanted to pick up on, something that you said yesterday, Chief Judy, and mentioned today, is the degree of fragmentation. So if you look at the National Action Plan, it's actually not a comprehensive document. It's a separate little chapter for each group and then a separate federal pathway. And then we don't see comprehensive plans from the provinces, but now we see rolling out an AFN has their own plan. The Native Women's Association of Canada has their own plan. The Métis Nation has their own plan. And then a whole bunch of subgroups have their own plan. And they don't all say the same thing. And there's literally no coordination. And I'm wondering if you can talk about what that's going to mean for implementation of any of these plans.
Well, the fragmented implementation will mean that our survivors will continue to struggle the way they're struggling, and that they aren't going to get the substantive support that they originally had wanted. Because you have to ask how those multiple fragmented action plans going to match up with any budgetary processes, and how is the 2.2 billion going to be dispersed? And I think we had sort of an idea when they rolled it out that it'll go to those existing organizations possibly. And as you know, a lot of those organizations are already struggling and already probably need top-up dollars, and then think how much is actually going to go to these meaningful programs for our missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls. And if the action plans are all not hitting the core issues, we will still have systemic violence and racism and poor treatment of our women and girls and two-spirited. How is that going to work to address the core issues? And then the other part that's not really addressed is the institutional and the like the RCMP and all the other institutions, Canada. How is that going to impact? Because the National Inquiry actually only had 6 months in doing the expert and institutional hearings, so that was never really fully developed out how it could have been as part of the hearings. And then you have all these fragmented action plans. How is it really hitting those issues? So I think we're going to have a very problematic time pulling together all these multiple level of action plans for substantive, meaningful impact and changes to our women, unfortunately. So that's why I was saying what I said in the outset. It's justice delayed is still justice denied for our women. And unfortunately, we're going to be doing the same thing we've had to do without resources, without support. And, I can, it's very difficult because, our women are still going missing and murdered. And what is the prevention piece look like as well? There's so many facets to this that's going to be really challenging to pull together and have a coordinated effort on it. And I still think the federal government doesn't really understand what these core issues are. They say, oh, we got an action plan, but it doesn't really fully meet the needs what we were hoping it would have.
Some of what you are saying here is some of the things that really caused me great concern, that the way it reads now, it's like an open call for organizations just to make funding proposals for programs and services that largely already exist. And you don't really see the genocide part of it, where state-based genocide, state-based violence, from policing, the extractive industry, healthcare industry, like all of the institutions and governments that are also perpetrators of violence against Native women and murders of Native women. You don't see any focus or attention on that. It's really just, here you go, apply for some more money. And they're basically jumbling up their entire Indigenous portfolio, I don't know what else to call it, into a giant funding proposal. And, like Ellen, this concerns me greatly, because if you think about the people on the ground, how is this going to impact the women and children on the ground if we can't move past what it is they're already doing?
Well, I agree with you, because I think what all the organizations need to do is put their egos aside and think about the realities that Indigenous women are facing. I mean, you mentioned resource development where there are man camps, and some communities have checkpoints so that the workers can't come into the community, which I think is one way to keep our people safe. I think there's so many instances where we can see that the government, this is just about funding for them, and they think that they can throw money and it's all going to be okay, when we know that it's not going to be okay, that the solutions have been identified, but now we need to enable the people to carry out those solutions. We know what needs to be done, and at so many levels, as through all those reports that we mentioned, from the Royal Commission, TRC, and Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women Inquiry. We need a major transformation in society. We need to have reconciliation amongst ourselves, because colonization has created this traumatic cycle, this historical trauma that we continue to see repeated time and time again within our communities, which is, don't feel, don't speak, don't tell. This is embedded from one of the legacies of the Indian residential school system, which we're seeing today, which we see like the grief nationally of that hurts the hearts of the Indigenous people in the communities. And we need to figure out a way where we're not talking about funding. What we need to do is to make that major shift that we've all been trying to get Canadian society to realize. And we have to understand that the investments that are coming into Canada, they're not just Canadian. There are European, there are Asian companies that come in, and they are dispossessing us even more, as if we haven't lost enough land. So the issues are very complex. We don't need to teach government what those issues are. They know. They don't want to pay for it. They want to throw a few pennies here and there, satisfy the organizations who they give a lot of airtime to, while the people who are working on the ground who are actually trying to make a difference in the lives of Indigenous people are not well supported. If we're talking about incarceration, that's one issue. But let's look at that cycle of incarceration. Let's look at that cycle of dysfunction that we have in our communities caused by the genocidal assimilation policies of Canada, which are still continuing. We have no trust in Canada. We have no trust in the police. And in fact, we don't have trust amongst each other. And what we need to do is change that mindset we have inside ourselves, because we know what the solutions are of how to keep our women safe. We know what the priorities are. We are facing, this Anthropocene epoch that we are all experiencing on this planet. And we have to start pulling our socks up and stop waiting for government to take that national plan of action. We know what the solutions are to keep people safe, but we don't have, as Judy said, we don't have the resources to do it. We need a real traditional warrior society that protects the women, the children, and the people. And that means, it's that hanging tobacco, that's what we call it in our language. Those who are carrying the burden of peace. And we need those people, men and women alike, to take part in that. We don't want to have more inquiries. We don't want to have the government tell us they're going to give us a little piece of money here to shut us up. This problem is not going to go away with money. This problem is only going to go away if there is a genuine and sincere political will, and there is a will within our communities and amongst Canadian society to educate themselves what genocide actually means, what colonization has done to us, and how are we going to change it. We are the authors of our own change. And we cannot wait for Canada because it doesn't care if we are extinct. It does not care about us. It is doing something to check the box to say to the UN, we have come up with a national plan of action. All the conversations they've had with CEDA, the Committee for Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, they can tick the box and say, oh, look, Canada is really a really nice place to live. But they're not getting rid, they're just brushing the dirt under the carpet. And so we need to look at this as how can we get Canadian entities to comply with human rights, from policing, lawyers, judges, teachers, educators, everybody, including ourselves. And I think that's what's missing in this national report. They're talking about potential liability. They're talking about funding. And like I said before, no amount of money, as we have seen from the Indian residential school settlement, is going to change how we feel about ourselves and is going to change the situation. We are the authors of our own destiny and we need to take back control. The problem is that Canada has always used force against our people. And so this, I think, is a much bigger issue than what a national plan of action is supposed to address. There's the issue of housing, there's the issue of shelters, and there's a place, I think, for all of what has been said and mentioned in this national plan of action. But until we can get ourselves together and act as nations in solidarity with each other, to act like a community again, Canada is going to continue to win and divide and conquer. And there is no place for that anymore. We cannot afford to lose any more time because those children are depending on us. They are looking at us. And if they only see us fighting over money, then that's what they're going to learn. And it's really about, I want to be safe as an Indigenous woman. I want to be safe in a racist community that continues to hate Mohawks. I want every Indigenous person to be safe in this homeland of ours. And it's not going to be possible if you're going to depend on government to do that, because they don't care about us.
No, it's such an important point. And the other thing that they do is they keep us in perpetual engagement, perpetual consultation. It's perpetual. It never ends. So the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples wasn't good enough to get the views of Indigenous peoples on the basics. I'm not talking about, nation to nation. There's going to be differences, but the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, apparently that wasn't enough in order to get, it was massive. You got the testimony of the survivors themselves, the communities, about what they want. It's written in a report. Why on earth would you now take that and say, oh, well, we can't actually implement it until we engage? And then the engagement is where they get you. It's endless meetings and tables and commissions and committees to do what we already told them they need to do. And here we have the national inquiry. We said all of these things. Here's all of the things you need to do and more. And no. We need to engage for another 2 years. Oh, and we still don't have a full plan. So we're going to keep engaging for the next 3 years until we come up with an implementation plan. It's like never ending. And at some point, I just think it's actually more valuable for us to pull out of that process and say, no, you know what? We're done engaging. Just deal with it. And, Chief Judy, one of the things that you said yesterday, we didn't have a lot of time to talk about all the things we wanted to, but you said, this long-standing call by Indigenous peoples to implement UNDRIP into this country and make all Canadian laws compliant with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But even that doesn't have a central focus in this National Action Plan, even though at the beginning of the National Action Plan, it says one of our principles is that we're going to make sure we go forward in a way that's grounded in human rights. But, okay, so where is your comprehensive plan to address the United Nations, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples? What do you think about, Canada's stalling on that?
Well, first and foremost, when I talk about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, I explained that our Indigenous rights, like the Mohawk, Tideland rights, the Secwépemc, Tideland rights, all of our Indigenous Tideland rights across Canada, they're the first and foremost because they're still intact. They're intact, like in our nation. And in many in BC, the ones we represent outside the modern treaty process, we have not relinquished, surrendered, or given up any of those rights, as well as our land, so that the laws are still there. And so the next thing on the UN Declaration is that we weren't thought of in the UN Universal Human Rights Declaration. I think it's 1948. So that's why we had to pen our own Indigenous rights, human rights framework, and many of our people did that across Turtle Island and globally. And then the Human Rights Council revised it, and then the UN, United Nations, further revised that when we were, they wouldn't, make it more palatable, I guess, to the state government. So we ended up with the version we ended up. The one clause that didn't change is the self-determination clause. So that's just my grandson. So self-determination, my cousin, Chief Arthur Mannion, used to always say, he passed away now, but he used to always say, self-determination is the antidote for colonization. So, in our own self-determination that Ellen just talked about is very much so what we need to do. We have to really work on, that self-determination, what that looks like for us. And he actually wrote 2 books about it. And I think they're very important books and kind of gave us a little bit of a blueprint, what we could look at in doing our self-determination plans. So that, and I know the government twists those words around on us. They use it like self-government and self-determination. They kind of use them interchangeably now, but self-determination has more of a meaning where it comes from the nation, because it's all that decolonizing process. And we've been conditioned under the Indian Act for programs and services, and those are just come back to us in forms of poverty, the program services, because all of the wealth and the land that were dispossessed from us, that were taken from us, because if we were managing our territories and we had all the wealth from our territories, do you think we'd be going to the government? No, because we would have it all. And we would be managing it to ensure there's housing, to ensure there's water, to ensure that there's the families are taken care of and that there's jobs, and we're still carrying on our way of life. But Canada didn't want us to carry on our way of life because they wanted us to colonize. They wanted to assimilate us into society, and that's what all the legislation and policy was intent. That's what reserves were intent. That's what residential schools were intending to do. They didn't think we would last this long. The Indian problem, the Indian land claims question, they didn't think we'd last because we were supposed to assimilate, which in our hearts we will not ever assimilate, because we enjoy our way of life. We enjoy being connected with Mother Earth, the water. We enjoy carrying out the teachings and being caretakers of Mother Earth, and all of our way of life includes our spiritual way of life as well. So and those are the teachings we have, and I think that's what's really kept us going all of these years. And so we have a lot of ceremonies, a lot of things that we do in our life to balance and harmonize ourselves. So the colonized ways, I think that's what we're dealing with. And I agree, stepping out, because we had to step out to do our own programs. I shouldn't say program, but our own way to stand our women up. It was called House of the Moon. So it's across North America, across Turtle Island, and includes tribes north and south of the Medicine Line. So the women train each other and do presentations and curriculum. And so we train each other to go back into our own community and into our own nations and families, and teach and continue to build up, ourselves and our families for wellness and healing, and all of there's a wide spectrum of different training, and so it's addressing violence against women, missing, murdered women, and also self-defense. So the House of the Moon launched, and we already had 7 graduates. So the next intake is in August, and that'll be for 14. So we're doubling that. And it's not government funded. It's not government sponsored in any way. So it's just people doing that for people, and especially women. And so we carry that on. That's just one example of women doing things themselves. And I already talked about the advocacy work in the legal injustice and the supporting missing, murdered women and families. So there's a wide, probably more ways that people are doing that. And my mother, she's 83, and she's been doing this life all of her own. She funds a lot of the things she does by her own work she does, and a lot of the families go to her, so she helps everyone and the different institutions, education and communities. So she's been living that way of life, and it's and she has not depended on any government funding or the band or anybody or me or anybody. She just gets an idea and she does it. So she's a true example. I guess we have a lot of elders that have lived that way. They look at the things happening and they kind of shake their head, and they just keep on doing what they're doing. And that's real true self-determination, true sovereignty, because we're keeping to our way of life, and we're keeping to what we do, and we're helping the next generation with that knowledge, that language, with that understanding, so that they can survive these attacks, these genocide attacks on us, and they can survive all the violence that's being perpetuated on us. And I think that's what's needed to help our young people survive. And those dynamic, young, educated ones that have both worlds, they're going to make those substantive changes. And I think that's got to be our hope for the future. And my grandmother raised me and taught me a lot of things, and a lot of the responsibility that you have as a mother and a grandmother, and my mother does that as well. So I think really that's where a lot of the teachings need to come from, so that we can survive and continue this, because Canada's going to fight us every inch of the way. My cousin had a saying. He said, "Don't put your head on the shoulder of the guy, stealing your land," meaning Trudeau, right? So you can't rely on Trudeau. So we have to, really look at how we're doing this. And unfortunately, it's not resourced, it's not funded, and we just have to find those creative ways, because the government policies are really enticing, the elected system, a certain path, and we have to be very watchful of that. And we always have to have, a really grounding in our ways, so that we don't lose sight of where we're going. And I really liked hearing what Ellen said and what you said about, our future, because we're going to continue this. We're not giving up our warrior life anytime soon. We can't. It's ingrained in us. This is what we do. And this is how our people survive. So you have to keep doing it.
Exactly. And, I really like what both of you say. And, you've been on this podcast before, and it always starts first and foremost with us, our laws, our values, our principles, our traditions and customs. It's the beauty of who we are as a people, but it's also the strength of who we are. And nothing Canada has ever done has been able to take that away. They've tried, they've interfered with it, they've manipulated with it, they tried to erase it, they tried to eliminate us, but our laws are still here. They've never been extinguished. They can't be extinguished. So long as we are here on our lands, our laws reign. And when it comes to Canada and its purported laws, it can't follow its own laws. At least we follow and are committed to our laws. It's a part of our identity. Canada's an outlaw. That's the only reason why international human rights laws exist. It's for states who can't follow their own laws and who are essentially renegades and outlaws in the international community. And Ellen, I wanted to ask you a bit about this because, the Royal Commission, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the National Inquiry, and every United Nations human rights treaty body has said that the root of these problems is that Canada not only can it not follow its own laws, but it doesn't live up to the basic minimum human rights standards that exist all around the world. And they only exist to regulate states. They don't regulate us. We have our own laws, but they regulate states. And I'm wondering, in all of your international work, trying to get the Convention on the Rights of the Child to be implemented in Canada, trying to get the elimination of discrimination against women or racial discrimination or human rights or even UNDRIP implemented into Canada. Why do you think that's such a challenge for Canada? They sign on to these things and they resist implementing it into their own domestic laws here in this country.
I think there's a certain thing about the character of Canada. And the fact that, since the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, or since the crisis here in 1990, Indigenous people have been rising, and they've been rising, and we know about their system. They don't know anything about ours because they don't care to learn. And I think one of the things that you mentioned before was the resiliency. And the resiliency is what's going to keep us going. It's going to sustain our advocacy, because Canada really, I think we're putting a lot of blemishes for the last 31 years on their reputation as human rights defenders. They're really actually human rights abusers. And Stephen Harper said it best. His character and his attitude. He was inviting at one of the G7 summits. Come to Canada and invest because there's lots of land and lots of resources. When it comes to respecting the rights of Indigenous people, they don't respect us. And they have been able to do so as they've been doing with the Wet'suwet'en, with here in Kanehsatà and 1492 land back, the Mi'kmaq people, with force. This is how they see implementing human rights, the protection of their economic rights. And that's all that matters. Human rights don't matter. Human rights are on the lowest rung of that totem pole, excuse the expression. They know the right words to say. They have a bureaucratic culture who are the gatekeepers. You have over 250 employees in Justice Canada working against Indigenous people's human rights, trying to play the game of semantics of look what the government is doing. We're spending, $10 billion on Indigenous people for X, Y, and Z. So they must be doing something right. When in actuality, 67% of all funding for Indigenous people is actually going to Canadian entities. It's not coming to the communities. So they're not really helping Indigenous people. It's a nice mirrors and sleight of hand It's coercive. And because the UN does not have an implementation, it politely criticizes states. There's no implementation of those treaties. And there needs to be stronger implementation in the UN, other than the Security Council, which is really headed by the United States. There needs to be something within countries to stop human rights abuses against Indigenous people. I think that we should take all the Indigenous people in Canada should go to The Hague, go to the UN, and make a genocidal complaint, a crime against humanity, against the government of Canada and its provinces. Because we cannot forget the provinces. They are just as guilty as the federal government. And with this National Action Plan, there's nothing to bring, even if it were a good plan, there's nothing to bring along the side the provinces and the territories. So it's like it stays here. It's staying here, and it's not filtering down to the realities of people on a daily basis. You think the municipality of Oka is going to respect the National Action Plan against violence against women? No, they can't even respect us. So it goes back to that major society shift change that we need, which I think there's a lot of good Canadians out there who respect Indigenous people and want to make change, because it's horrific. It's horrific what we're seeing unfolding, just before the pandemic and now with the discovery. And I'm sure there's more children's bodies that we are going to be discovering. And again, we're going to relive that cycle of grief that we're all feeling right now.
That's what genocide looks like. This is what it's: mass graves, unmarked graves, murdered and missing. This is literally what genocide looks like. I don't know what more proof they need, but before we run out of time, I want to ask you both a really important question. What is the most important thing you think that federal and provincial governments should do within the next few weeks and months to really address genocide? Not like all this program and service stuff, but really, what do you think? What would be your call to them? Chief Judy?
Yeah, I wanted to say we have a rare moment here. And I think it's a turning point, what Ellen's describing. We have a lot of the public with us on this issue. I have my phone, emails, and texts. People are continually, they don't know where to send them. So they're just sending them out to different people, I guess. But we have a rare moment here that we could really pull together. How are we going to work in regards to this reconciliation? Because I was saying it's beyond reconciliation. The chiefs are saying they want restitution. What's restitution look like? It's giving the land back. It's giving our resources back. It's giving us that recognition. And so we can carry on, our self-determination. I think that's what has to happen, because bottom line, every commission that's been, from the Royal Commission to the Truth and Reconciliation and the National Inquiry against Missing Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirited, I think the base is because we're dispossessed off our land. We're dispossessed and our title and rights are assumed under the federal government, and then the provinces received land and resources. So even though I fight on all these human rights issues, I know it always goes back to the land. That big slogan, land back, and in BC, a lot of the land out here is outside of treaty. So in that, what do we want them to do? We want them to recognize, we want them to be able to, we stand up our laws in our own lands, and we have a say in our land and our resources, so we can build our nations up and build back what our governance structures were, because our governance structures were much more exacting, much more far-reaching than what even the provincial and federal laws are, to take care of the earth. They're pulling out old growth trees now, and, to the last tree, and they're polluting the waters, all of the waters, and, they're just impacting every level you could think of. Fisheries, wild salmon. I've been doing a lot of work on that, to bring the wild salmon back, and everything that they've destroyed, we're having to go in and rebuild, and so that there's only one Mother Earth. That's the big thing on this genocide, because whatever they perpetuate on the land, they're perpetuating against our people, and a lot to our women, because they have to break the foundation, and the women are the foundation. My grandmother had always said that. So when you're looking at what that genocide looks like, for what they're doing, they're trying to break us. They're trying to remove us, eradicate us. That's what our elders would say. They're eradicating us and removing us from the land, because they want the land and the resources. So if we're able to get to a place where we can, have our territories the way, because the Secwépemc, we have 180,000 square kilometers. We're one of the largest tribes in the interior of British Columbia. And that's why they want to break us. They want us to force us into treaty and force us into incremental agreements with the government to so that we can put our title and rights and have their land. They access our land and resources. So it goes back to the land fight. And then, with that, we had our governance structures, and our women had a say. We were coexisting, and we were very much part of the warrior life. We had women warriors, and we also had the the governance structures, and how the men worked and how the women worked. So we had our governance very structured and sound. We had survived thousands of years. It was just till this disruption of the reserves and residential schools and the violence against women that started breaking down the families, breaking down us individually, and breaking our people apart, our nations apart. That divide and rule tactic the government's always done. But many of us are awake to that, and we know that, and we just need to keep continuing. And I go out throughout our territory, and I'm still talking to many people who are upholding those values still, and I respect that. And I know the Indian Act Chief and Council structures are not, they're just part of the extensions of the government, and they're there for programs and services until our people don't need them. In our community, I think we're less than half dependent now on program services, which is not an easy way, but we have to keep building it. So we're truly self-determined and truly not dependent on the government. I'm not saying the government doesn't owe us that money, because they're removing it from all our resources, our land and water. We do need our full money from our land and our resources. That's what they don't want to relinquish. They don't want to relinquish the land and the resources. They want to control them, and they want to continue their assumed jurisdiction and authority over it. That's what our fight is. And I know we still have to have the healing part and keep our people spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically together and intact, and continue teaching them our way of life. Because I believe our way of life, we shared our resources. We shared with people, and we had all roles and expectations, and to live on our land. So that's where I'd like to get back to, and addressing the genocide. It truly is. Canada has to wake up. It is genocide. Trudeau stuttered the words when he said it the first time. He said it again, but in a way that's still not accountable. So that we have to get to that, and even in the archbishops across Canada, they're trying to say these apologies, but then they say, but we'll pray for you. Come and pray with us our way. They're still discounting, we have our own way of life, our own spiritual ways and stuff. So it's still colonization and genocide at its best. And I'm so happy to be here on Warrior Life, and know you've got a Warrior Life community, and we all continue to need to fight the good fight, because it is Canada will not relinquish in any which way, shape, or form. But we have a rare opportunity when working with a lot of the people that are waking up to this now, and how we need their support in making these changes.
Exactly. And so, Ellen, I'd love to hear from you. What could the federal, provincial government do in the next weeks or months to protect women and children from violence and murders and disappearances?
Well, it's going to take longer than a week, I think.
Yeah.
There needs to be reparations. I think I'll echo what Judy has already mentioned, but reparations, respect for our human rights, to look at us as human beings. We are always looked at as if we're the other, like we're subhuman, the way they did 500 years ago. And to respect the rights of the women, the Iroquois people, the Haudenosaunee people. The women are title holders to the land. They do not respect that. They still refuse to respect that. I've asked something to Prime Minister Trudeau in regards to our land issue, which is put a moratorium on all development. And imagine if they did that. We would have the chance at least 1 week break. We sit down, we talk, and we understand each other. They educate themselves on what the causes of the genocide are. They educate themselves on what decolonization is by us telling them what we our version of it, and for them to understand our laws and to be educated on our laws and why they're so important to help the survival of our species, to create a sustainable way of life. I think that one of the things that they always look at us as, they commodify our human rights. They don't look at us as human beings. We need to have a renewed relationship. That there is, like I said before, there's no trust. You can't have a relationship, a healthy relationship anyways, if the trust is missing. And for those who are on the front lines to provide them support, the Friendship Center, the Native Women's Shelter in Montreal works with women who are living on the street and tries to help them. And so we need to look at their healing, helping those people who are the most vulnerable in society, but also help to, how do you deal with genocide? Ask them that question. How do you deal with genocide? How do you overcome that? World War II, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came out because of World War II and the genocide, the Holocaust against the Jews. Our people fought in that war. The Iroquois Confederacy was declared war before the United States. I think even before Canada, of what was going on in Germany. So we are a proud people to look at us in the richness that we have and the dignity that we have that has not been granted to us because they don't like us because of their racism. To look at people like Joyce Echaquan, who was in pain, where you are most vulnerable, where you are sick, you are depending on people to provide you that care so you can be healthy. That was denied to her. You would think that a society would wake up with that, but it doesn't. Because the media, and I want to call upon the media has a huge role to play in the attitudes of society, and they block out the voices of the people at the grassroots. They block out what it actually means. And we're just 3-second sound bites. And I think that's what we need to do, is retrain ourselves to sit and to listen. We had all those inquiries. We shouldn't have had to have another inquiry to examine the actions or the lack of actions of Canada. We need a break. We need peace. And you cannot have peace as long as there is fear and hatred amongst people. It's not going to happen. I think we need to look at the fact that, Indigenous youth are leaving the reserves because there's nothing for them there. Why is there nothing for them there? It's because the Indian Act system is there and hangs over our head. And so the Indian Act system needs to be broken. We need to chop that into small pieces where it's not going to bug us anymore, and that our laws will be there at the forefront because our laws respect the earth, respect the waters, respect each other. And if they can understand a simple concept like that, maybe they are redeemable. But for now, I'm going to wait because I've seen too much reports on paper. Too many trees have been cut for these reports that have not been implemented any solutions. So I always have to have hope. You always have to have hope. And I'm asking Canadians, I'm asking Quebecois, I'm asking all the people who are in the international community listening to your podcast to help us to overcome these challenges and hurdles, because we deserve peace. We've given so much to this world, and it's time for the world to step up and help Indigenous peoples.
Well, that's a perfect call to action. This is Canadians, the international community, other countries really need to step up. We have never really asked for more than just peace. Let's live together in peace. And I think it's about time. So thank you both so much for sharing. We don't get an opportunity in the media to talk more than 2 or 3 minutes. Even if it's a panel, it'll be like a 7-minute panel, and you cannot get the full scope of the problem and the impact and what we've been saying for years about what we need going forward. And so thank you for taking the time, because we have a younger generation that's listening to this. What does the warrior life mean? And it is about working towards peace and love for your community, and protecting your laws and customs, and that's just so important. So thank you, Chief Judy. Thank you, Ellen. I always admire everything that you both do as warrior women, and for taking the time to do this. And thanks to all of you who are listening. Both our young warriors coming up who are looking for this direction and inspiration, and also to all of the Canadians and Americans and international people who listen to this. You have a role to play. Don't think of this podcast as information or education or entertainment. This is about education for action. You've heard this now. Take action in all of the different ways that you can take. It can literally mean the matter of life and death for Indigenous peoples. And we've long sided in wars, in treaties, in trade, in marriage, in community alongside of you. It's now time for you to step up and side with us. So thank you so much. I'll make sure to post a link to everybody's contact information, the National Action Plan, the Federal Pathway, the National Inquiry, so that you have easy links to all of it. But we need you to push. And don't forget, share this podcast far and wide. Use it in your classrooms, in your institutions. Make sure that you're lifting up the voices of Indigenous women warriors and Indigenous peoples all over. And you can also always support us anytime. Check out my website. Till next time, keep living a warrior life. Walaliag, my friends.